Enoch 21 is not a story, it is a warning buried in texts that almost no one reads, and that many preferred to delete. Because what he reveals is not symbolic, it is not allegory, it is not metaphor. It is a description of a real place, built before the foundation of the world, prepared to imprison beings who have transgressed boundaries that should never be crossed. We're not talking about demons. We're not talking about humans. We're talking about angels locked away, beings created to inhabit the light, now confined in an abyss where even the light itself fears to enter. The Bible mentions that there are angels kept in eternal prisons in darkness until the day of judgment. Enoch 21 shows where. And when you understand that, something changes inside you, because he realizes that the universe is not as safe as it seems, and that there are places prepared not for punishment, but to contain that which should never exist. Enoch was no ordinary preacher. He wasn't a distant scribe collecting stories from others. He was taken, snatched from his earthly existence, and transported through regions that human language can barely name. But the text doesn't describe this transport as a vague mystical experience or symbolic vision. It describes a physical journey through specific locations with architectural, environmental, and sensory characteristics. Enoch sees, feels temperature, perceives depth, observes structures. And at a certain point in this journey, he is taken to a place that silences even his angelic guides. A place where light itself hesitates to enter. Chapter 21 begins without warning. There is no emotional preparation. Enoch simply arrives. And what he finds is not an abstract concept of punishment or a metaphor for evil. It is a prison, but not just any prison. A cosmic prison, built with materials that shouldn't exist in known nature, erected at a depth that has no visible bottom, maintained by forces that don't depend on guards or physical chains. The space itself there functions differently. It's as if the laws governing the rest of creation were suspended at that specific point, as if that place existed outside the normal flow of time, preserved in a permanent state of waiting. There is something profoundly unsettling about the idea that such a place could exist, not as a vague mythological construct, but as a real location within cosmic geography, a fixed point in the structure of the universe, prepared in advance, awaiting inevitable occupation. The first thing Enoch notices is the silence. Not the tranquil silence of a forest at night or an empty library, a heavy, dense, almost tangible silence. The kind of silence that presses against the ears from the inside out, that makes the heart beat faster just to confirm that there is still sound in the universe. But this silence is not complete. Occasionally, it is broken, not by voices, not by cries, by movements. Something shifts in the deep shadows, something too large to be ignored, but never completely visible. Presences that Enoch senses before seeing, that observe before being observed. And when he finally manages to distinguish shapes in the near-absolute darkness, he realizes he is not alone. But he also realizes something more disturbing, that those presences do not move freely. They are contained, trapped, not by visible chains, but by something more fundamental, as if the very space around them refused to allow movement beyond certain invisible limits. The text describes columns, but not decorative or architectural columns in the common sense. Incandescent metal columns, so hot that the air around them distorts, creating visual waves that make everything seem unstable, as if reality there were constantly on the verge of collapse. This metal shines with its own light, a luminosity that doesn't warm the environment but intensifies the feeling of oppression, as if the light there existed not to reveal, but to keep something contained. The function of these columns is not merely architectural. They seem to serve as anchors, points of fixation that keep that anomalous space connected to the rest of the creation without allowing its contents to escape or spread. Between these columns, in the intermediate space where shadow and light mix unnaturally, are the prisoners. The text doesn't call them monsters. It doesn't describe them as deformed creatures or wild beasts. It calls them angels, but imprisoned angels, fallen angels. Angels who violated something so fundamental in the cosmic order that their very existence became incompatible with freedom. Enoch observes these beings and perceives something that deeply disturbs him. They still think. They still possess full consciousness. They still remember what they were, what they did, what they lost. But they cannot act. They cannot escape. They cannot even ask for forgiveness, because there is no court to which they can appeal. The sentence has already been pronounced, and it is final. There is no date set for review. There is no possibility of early release for good behavior. What has been determined will remain until the absolute end of all things, and perhaps not even then will there be liberation. The text promises nothing but waiting, conscious waiting, lucid waiting, the kind of waiting that destroys not the body but hope, which is infinitely worse. Imagine remaining conscious for millennia, perhaps for entire eras of cosmic history, fully aware of what has been lost, with no possibility of change, without even the relief of unconsciousness or forgetfulness. This is the true terror that Enoch witnesses. Why does this place exist? The question echoes throughout the text without being directly answered, but clues emerge. These beings were not imprisoned for common sins, not for abstract pride or philosophical envy. They were imprisoned for transgressing specific boundaries, for crossing limits that separated dimensions of creation that should never have mixed. The book of Enoch in previous chapters speaks of angels who descended to earth, who became involved with human women, who taught forbidden knowledge to humanity, secrets about weapons, cosmetics, witchcraft, astrology, knowledge that accelerated human development in directions that should never have been reached so early. And the result of this transgression was not just individual punishment, it was cosmic rupture. A correction so drastic was necessary that it had to include the flood, the almost complete erasure of antediluvian civilization, the reshaping of the relationship between heaven and earth. But the angels who initiated this cascade of events were not simply destroyed. They were preserved, imprisoned, kept conscious. Why? Perhaps because destroying them completely would erase the record of their transgression. And that record needs to exist. It needs to be remembered. It needs to serve as a warning. The continued existence of these beings in eternal imprisonment functions as a living memorial, as a permanent testament to what happens when certain limits are crossed. Not as allegory or symbol, but as a concrete reality that continues to exist throughout history. Enoch walks through this place guided by angels who don't speak much. They only point, they indicate, they allow him to see. And what he sees is not presented as a mystical vision or symbolic dream. It is described with specific sensory details. He feels the heat. He feels the weight of the atmosphere. He feels the absence of anything alive besides the prisoners and their guides. There are no insects. There are no microorganisms. There is no organic decay. That place exists outside the natural cycles of life and death, as if it were a bubble isolated from the rest of creation, maintained in a permanent state through mechanisms that transcend known physics. The abyss that Enoch observes has no visible bottom. He looks down and sees only darkness that continues beyond the reach of any light, depth that is not measured in meters or kilometers, but in concepts, as if that space were infinite within finite coordinates, as if the geometry there obeyed different rules, and at the bottom of this endless darkness something moves, not hastily, not agitatedly, but with the slow and inevitable movement of something that possesses all the time in the universe. Something that doesn't need to escape because it knows that eventually everything will come to it. There are layers within that abyss, levels that descend ever deeper, and each level seems to contain different categories of prisoners, as if even among the condemned there were precise gradations of transgression and corresponding punishment. The fire described in the text does not consume. This is perhaps its most disturbing characteristic. Fire that burns eternally without destroying what it touches. Fire that purifies? No. Fire that punishes without offering the relief of annihilation. The prisoners are enveloped in this fire, not as a punishment that will eventually end, but as a permanent condition of existence. They cannot die because they are not mortal in the common sense, but they also cannot live because they have been removed from the flow of creation. They exist in an intermediate state, conscious but not free, preserved but not protected, kept for a purpose that will only be revealed at the absolute end of all things. This fire does not follow normal thermodynamic laws. It does not consume fuel. It does not produce ashes. It does not spread or diminish. It simply exists, constant, eternal, fulfilling a function that transcends physical punishment and enters the territory of metaphysical containment. As if that fire burned not only bodies, but the very capacity to act, to choose, to participate in creation. It is impossible not to notice parallels. Contemporary humanity lives fascinated by the transgression of limits. Through the pursuit of knowledge that was previously considered forbidden or dangerous, through the manipulation of fundamental life structures via advanced genetics, through the attempt to create artificial intelligence that rivals or surpasses human consciousness, through the exploration of dimensions of reality via quantum physics and experiments with particle accelerators. All of this echoes, in a disturbing way, the ancient descriptions of angels who taught forbidden knowledge to humanity. Some scholars suggest that the real danger lies not in knowledge itself, but in the speed at which it is acquired, in the lack of spiritual and ethical maturity to deal with exponential technological power. Perhaps it is no coincidence that these issues arise precisely at the historical moment when humanity possesses, for the first time, a real capacity for total self-destruction. Nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons, artificial intelligence without proper control, genetic manipulation without a complete understanding of the long-term consequences, climate change accelerated by rampant industrial activity. Each of these areas represents a frontier where humanity is testing limits that perhaps should not be tested, at least not with the haste and carelessness that characterize modern technological progress. And Enoch 21 remains there, in the pages preserved by Ethiopian tradition, as a silent reminder that there are consequences for exceeding certain limits, consequences that do not appear immediately, but that are absolute when they finally manifest. But Enoch 21 does not offer easy answers. It does not present an instruction manual. It only shows what happens when certain limits are exceeded. And it shows this through the worst possible form of teaching, through the example of beings who cannot be redeemed, who cannot be saved, who can do nothing but wait for the final judgment that will confirm what they already know. Their condemnation is eternal, not because the judge is cruel, but because what they did created irreversible consequences in the structure of reality, like pouring poison into a river. Even after the guilty party is imprisoned, the poison continues to flow. The consequences continue to spread, and someone has to pay the price of containment. The angels imprisoned in Enoch 21 are not merely victims of their own choice. They are also unwitting guardians of a warning. Their preserved existences serve as a living monument to what must not be repeated. And the fact that this chapter was preserved precisely in the Ethiopian tradition kept intact while other traditions fragmented or removed it, suggests that some cultures understood the importance of keeping this record available. Not out of sadism, not out of morbid fascination, but because forgetting would be too dangerous. Human collective memory is fragile. Generations pass and essential knowledge is lost, warnings ignored, lessons forgotten, and then the same mistakes are made again, as if they were new, as if no one before had ever experienced that path and discovered that it leads only to destruction. Preserving texts like Enoch 21 is a form of resistance against this forgetting. It is an insistence on keeping alive the memory that there are real and permanent consequences for certain actions. As Enoch's account progresses, the tension increases, not through dramatic action, but through an accumulation of unsettling details. He observes that the prisoners do not interact with one another. Each remains isolated within their own section of the abyss. As if even among the condemned there were a hierarchy of punishment, as if different transgressions deserved different levels of isolation. Some seem to be closer to the surface, where the light from the incandescent columns still reaches. Others are in depths where only absolute darkness prevails. And in the deepest levels, where not even Enoch can see completely, something awaits, something that his angelic guides do not name. Not because they don't know what it is, but because naming it would give more concrete form to a terror that works best by remaining undefined. The text suggests, without directly stating it, that a hierarchy exists not only among the prisoners, but also among the prison's own regions, as if certain areas were reserved for specific transgressions, as if the universe possessed a precise penal code, with punishments calibrated exactly for each type of cosmic violation. There is justice in this precision, but justice so cold and absolute that it offers no comfort. There is no room for mitigating circumstances. There is no possibility of appeal based on intentions, only actions and their consequences measured with implacable accuracy. Enoch doesn't ask much, perhaps because he realizes that certain questions shouldn't be voiced, or perhaps because the answers are too obvious, implicit in the very existence of that place. But at a certain point, one of his guides speaks. Not much, just enough to confirm what Enoch already suspected, that that place was prepared before the foundation of the world, not as an emergency response to an unexpected crisis, but as a planned contingency, as if the architect of creation knew from the beginning that free will would eventually produce transgression so serious that it would require permanent restraint. This revelation is more disturbing than any description of physical torture, because it suggests that the possibility of falling was inherent in the very design of creation. That genuine freedom necessarily included the capacity to choose wrongly in such a fundamental way that there would be no turning back, and that the price of this freedom was paid even before the transgression occurred, through the construction of a cosmic prison destined to remain empty until the inevitable moment when it would be needed. This raises profound questions about the nature of freedom. If the Creator knew that free will would produce falling, why grant freedom? The implicit answer in the text seems to be that genuine freedom cannot exist without the real possibility of wrong choice. And that creation populated by beings without the real capacity for choice would not be creation, but programming. The prisoners of Enoch 21 are not victims of flawed design. They are the inevitable consequence of perfect design that included true freedom. Why was Enoch taken there? That question persists. He was not a judge. He was not an executioner. He had no power to alter anything he saw. His role was merely to witness, to record, to carry back to humanity an account that most would reject as fantasy, but that a select few would preserve with reverent care. Perhaps the answer lies precisely in that. Enoch was taken there not to change what happened, but to warn about what could happen again, to show humanity that there are absolute consequences for certain actions, that not everything can be undone, that not every mistake can be corrected, that there are limits in the structure of reality that should not be tested, because the result of exceeding them is not simply temporary punishment or pedagogical correction. It is permanent removal from the possibility of participating in creation. It is exile not only from a place, but from the very condition of freedom. And this should provoke not only fear, but deep reflection on what it means to be free and what responsibilities accompany that freedom. Humanity often celebrates freedom without adequately considering its weight, as if freedom were merely the ability to do whatever one wants, without recognizing that true freedom includes responsibility for consequences. The imprisoned angels in Enoch 21 exercised their freedom. They made choices, and now they live, if one can call that life, with the eternal consequences of those choices. Not because they were betrayed or deceived, but because they underestimated the weight of what they were doing, because they believed they could transgress without paying the full price, and they discovered too late that they were wrong. The chapter doesn't end with Enoch heroically escaping. There's no battle, no dramatic confrontation. He's simply taken away in the same mysterious way he arrived. But something has changed in him. The text doesn't explicitly describe it, but it implies that no one visits that place and remains the same. Mere exposure to that reality alters the perception of everything else. Like astronauts who see Earth from space and can never look at the planet the same way again, Enoch saw what exists beyond the borders of the known world. He saw what happens when those borders are violated, and now he carries this knowledge as a burden. Because knowing without being able to do anything is his own form of imprisonment. He cannot save the condemned. He cannot prevent others from making the same mistakes. All he can do is bear witness and hope that his testimony will be enough for some, at least, to choose differently. There is profound loneliness in this role, to carry knowledge that most will reject, to be a witness to a reality that few will believe exists, and yet remain faithful to what was seen, to record it accurately, to preserve it for future generations who perhaps, just perhaps, will heed the warning. The structure of the universe revealed in Enoch 21 is not random. It is not cruel on a whim. It is necessary, like a cosmic immune system that isolates infections before they spread. The angels imprisoned there are not innocent victims. They are bearers of something that threatened the integrity of the entire creation. And the only way to preserve everything else was to completely isolate the corrupting element. Not out of revenge, not out of moral satisfaction, but out of absolute structural necessity. Just as a cancerous cell needs to be removed to preserve the organism, just as fire needs to be contained so as not to consume the entire forest, so too does cosmic transgression need to be isolated so as not to corrupt the entire creation. When the text finally ends, it offers no resolution. It doesn't guarantee that those prisoners will eventually be freed. It doesn't promise that the final judgment will bring redemption for all. It only confirms that there is a place prepared to contain that which can no longer freely participate in creation, and that this place will continue to operate until all things are finally resolved at the end of time. Perhaps then there will be liberation, perhaps transformation, perhaps complete annihilation. The text doesn't specify, and perhaps that's the most frightening part. The uncertainty isn't about whether there will be a final judgment, but about what will happen afterward. Whether there will be universal reconciliation or whether some ruptures are truly permanent. Whether divine love will eventually reach even those who seem beyond reach, or whether there is a point of no return that, once crossed, can never be reversed. These questions remain open, not because the text is ambiguous, but because the reality it describes transcends simple categories of punishment and redemption. If even angels were imprisoned for overstepping boundaries, what defines those boundaries today? The question remains suspended. Not because there are no answers, but because the answers require individual reflection. Each person, each generation, each civilization needs to rediscover where the boundaries lie between legitimate knowledge and dangerous transgression, between healthy ambition and destructive pride, between creative freedom and violation of fundamental order. Enoch 21 does not provide a list of specific prohibitions. It provides a principle that there are real limits in the structure of the cosmos, that these limits are not arbitrary, that violating them produces consequences that transcend individual punishment, and that ignoring this for convenience or arrogance does not eliminate the reality of these consequences. The Ethiopian Bible preserved this chapter while other traditions discarded it. Some argue it was removed because it was too disturbing. Others suggest it was deemed non-canonical for complex theological reasons. But the practical result was that entire generations of believers grew up without knowing this specific dimension of ancient cosmology, without understanding that there existed, in the texts preserved by some communities, a detailed description of reality that defies easy comfort and ready-made answers. The rediscovery of these texts in the modern world has provoked both fascination and discomfort because it confronts simplified narratives about good and evil, about punishment and redemption, about freedom and responsibility. Enoch 21 does not easily fit into conventional theological categories. It is not traditional hell because the prisoners are not human. It is not purgatory because there is no purification process or hope of progression. It is a category of its own, cosmic prison for entities that violated the fundamental order of creation in ways that ordinary human beings cannot even fully comprehend. And perhaps it is precisely this incomprehensibility that makes the chapter so disturbing, because it suggests that there are dimensions of moral and cosmic reality that completely transcend ordinary human experience. That there are violations so grave that they are beyond the normal human capacity to commit, but which nevertheless set a precedent for the seriousness with which the universe treats transgressions of its fundamental limits. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect is not what the chapter describes about the past, but what it implies about the present and the future. If that place was prepared before the foundation of the world, and if it remains operational throughout history, then it remains relevant now. You continue to wait, not necessarily for new prisoners, but as a permanent reminder that certain lines should not be crossed. And in the contemporary context, where humanity possesses unprecedented technological power, where we manipulate genetic code, create artificial intelligence, explore quantum physics, this reminder should provoke not paralysis out of fear, but wisdom in the application of knowledge. Because the true terror in Enoch 21 is not in the details of the incandescent columns or the bottomless abyss. It lies in the confirmation that there are irreversible consequences, that not everything can be undone, that some choices permanently define the fate of those who make them, and that the universe possesses a moral structure not by arbitrary imposition, but by intrinsic necessity. Violating this structure is not just breaking an external rule. It is breaking with the very possibility of participating harmoniously in creation. It's like trying to make music by destroying the instruments. It's possible, but the result is no longer music. It's just noise and destruction. The imprisoned angels tried to rewrite the rules of creation without sufficient authority or understanding to do so. And the result was not creative freedom, but chaos that needed to be contained before it destroyed everything else. Enoch returned from that journey. He recorded what he saw, and his record survived through millennia, preserved by communities that understood the importance of keeping alive the memory of what exists beyond the borders of the visible world. Not for entertainment, not for sensationalism, but because forgetting would allow humanity to repeat mistakes whose consequences are literally eternal. Chapter 21 is not frightening because of the violence or cruelty it shows. It is frightening because of what it confirms about the nature of the universe. That freedom has weight, that choices matter not only temporarily, but permanently. That there are regions of reality prepared to contain what can no longer be integrated into the created order. And that ignoring these realities does not eliminate them. It only increases the risk of stumbling upon them unprepared. If even angels, with all their knowledge and power, could violate limits so fundamentally that they demanded eternal imprisonment, how much more so humanity, fragile and easily seduced by promises of limitless power, needs to cultivate wisdom, humility, and a deep awareness of the boundaries that should not be crossed. This does not mean paralysis. It does not mean a rejection of knowledge or progress. It means recognizing that not all possible knowledge is beneficial knowledge, that not all power that can be acquired should be exercised, that there are reasons why certain boundaries have been established, and that these reasons do not simply disappear because modern technology offers ways to ignore them. The final question that Enoch 21 poses to each reader, to each generation, is not about the fate of the imprisoned angels. They have already chosen. They already live with the consequences. The question is about us, about contemporary humanity, which finds itself at a unique moment in history, possessing technological power comparable on a different scale to the forbidden knowledge that those angels transmitted to the antediluvian civilization. Are we using this power wisely? Are we respecting the limits that should be respected? Are we adequately considering the long-term consequences of our innovations? Or are we repeating the ancient mistake of seeking power without weighing the full price? These are not rhetorical questions. They are genuine questions that each generation needs to answer through its collective choices. And Enoch 21 remains there, preserved through millennia, not as a historical curiosity or an irrelevant arcane text, but as an active warning, as a permanent reminder that the universe has a structure that does not bend simply because we ignore or defy it. There is wisdom in heeding ancient warnings, especially warnings that have been preserved with such care through so many generations by people who understood that some truths are too important to be forgotten. The final silence that concludes the reading of Enoch 21 is not empty. It is charged, heavy with implications that continue to resonate long after the words end. And perhaps that is the ultimate purpose of the text, not to answer all the questions, not to solve all the mysteries, but to plant in the heart and mind of the reader a renewed awareness that there are dimensions of reality that transcend everyday understanding. That there are real consequences for actions that violate the fundamental structure of creation, and that true wisdom includes recognizing limits, respecting boundaries, and understanding that freedom without responsibility is not freedom. It is merely a prelude to imprisonment. If this resonated with you, don't ignore it. Leave a comment. Do you believe humanity is repeating the same mistakes as the angels?